morning, professors, students, and our esteemed guests. In today's seminar for project management, we would like to introduce to you Dr. T.K. Chang. We would like to inform you that all of these participants here are all third-year students from bachelor degree and some fourth-year students taking a course in project management building. And we would like to know more about your projects and material and technology choices, especially here in Indonesia. We have about 1 hour of this seminar, and it will be continued by 15 minutes of questions and answers. And that's all for today. And we have Professor Indra as the moderator for this talk. Thank you.
Okay, welcome to Department of Architecture, ITB, Bandung Institute of Technology. I think it would be better if Dr. TK could introduce himself, but the title of the title Economics of Building. This is and material and technology choices. So this is an issue that also I just maybe next week I will explain in my class. But of course we can see how the state of the art of economics of buildings in Australia, in Melbourne, where Professor T.K. Chang teach in the University of Melbourne Department of Architecture, right? Okay. Please, call your friends, yeah? Call your colleagues, please, yeah? So everybody. We're supposed to have 100 people here. Now it's only 20 or 30 maybe. Yeah?
Don't worry.
Okay. Can we start or we wait for everybody?
So, maybe introduce yourself.
Okay, you can introduce yourself.
Slowly, okay? I come from the University of Melbourne. Now, if you can understand my accent, you will realize that I am not born Australian. So where do you think I'm from? Malaysia. So I was born in Malaysia. I did my bachelor's degree at University of Malaya. I then went to do a PhD in structural engineering at University of Cambridge. I've worked in the UK, I've worked in Singapore, I've worked in Kuala Lumpur, and I've been in Melbourne since 2008. My kids are very confused because they're born in one country, hold a passport from another country, and now live in a third country. So if you ask them where they are from, they get their languages mixed up. They can't tell between head and coconut. In Malay, it's kepala and kelapa. So they've forgotten all their Malay. I can still understand most of your Bahasa, but I have difficulties speaking.
So you can ask the question.
So you can ask questions in Bahasa, and I can reply in English. My research, now from my background, you will realize that I've lived in many different countries. And when you live in different countries, you observe how people build. And so I'm not teaching an undergraduate course, this is my research. So when you look at how people build, then you start to think why they build that particular way. So when I'm here in Indonesia, I keep questioning, why are your columns so big? Then I realized, yes, earthquake. Because we would be like, this is too big. And why is it in the middle of a gallery? Then we leave it to the architects, right? So that gives you a little bit of background on why I study economics of building. Even though I'm trained as a structural engineer, I no longer do research in engineering. All my research is about economics and understanding how principles of economics dictate how we build. So this is my attempt at trying to explain what we do in Australia is different from what you do in Indonesia. There are no pretty pictures. I'm sorry, you are all architects. You love to look at pretty pictures. I have no pretty pictures. I only have boring graphs. Boring, very boring graphs. If you are an architect, you would hate my lecture. So this is what I'm trying to do. I want to explain why the cost of building is different in different cities around the world. You know that it's more expensive to build in New York, Hong Kong, compared to Bandung. Why? We take away the cost of land. Land doesn't count. This is just building. Why is it more expensive to build there than to build here? Labor cost, yes. One of the reasons is labor cost. So I'm trying to look at influence of factor inputs to construction, labor, capital, and resources. You have different resources compared to us. So it would be stupid for a contractor to build using an Australian system here or an Indonesian system in Australia. We have to find what's good for your country and what's good for our country. What materials to use, what technologies to use. They're all different in different countries. So I'm trying to think about, is there an optimum mix? And I'm involved in a project with civil engineering and the Ministry of what you call PUPR, Pekerjaan Umum and Perumahan Rakyat, Public Works and Housing, to develop your construction industry, basically making the construction industry in Indonesia more productive, more efficient. Okay, so these tools may help. So can we use this information to provide the industry with increased employment, improved productivity, increased profits, and generate, overall, stimulate your Indonesian economy? Because if you buy materials from overseas, the money flows out. What you want to do is make sure that everything stays as much as possible within Indonesia. Now, this is an interesting one. So I get this data, I'll show you the data sources later on. I get this from Turner & Townsend, which is a cost consultant, an international cost consultant. They have offices here in Jakarta, and I'm not sure if the numbers they have is very accurate, but these are their figures. So in Asia, I will always highlight Indonesia, okay? I have data for about 30 countries around the world, but you will always see Indonesia or Jakarta highlighted. And if I give this presentation anywhere else, it will change. So Jakarta is $888.90 US per square meter, which is an average of 6 building types. And as I've mentioned previously, land costs must not be included because land is a scarce resource. Can you explain this? Some of you have mentioned labor costs. What else? Why are you more expensive than Beijing, Shanghai? If you say labor costs, I think your labor cost is lower than China. Materials? Do you produce your own materials? You do. You have Krakatau steel. You have your local cement. So I'm trying to help you understand this. And if I can work out a model where I can have one formula that explains everything in every part of the world, that would be my research. That's what I intend to do, but I have not achieved that yet. And if you have ideas or if you wish to come and help me do this in Melbourne, you're always welcome. All right? So we are at, Melbourne is at 2004. Quite expensive. And we are trying to understand why it's expensive in Australia. In the more developed countries, it tends to be a lot more expensive. And as you have correctly mentioned, it is a function of labor cost. See, I told you, no pretty pictures. I start bang, 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 data. On the left-hand side, I have arranged the countries based on income, national income. So you will see Uganda, very low. right up to Switzerland up there at about what? 80,000 US dollars in 2017. Alright, so just remember, I will always organize the countries from high income countries to lower income countries. On the right hand side is wages, as you have correctly mentioned. Skilled worker wages per hour. This is 1 hour of skilled workers' wages. So, rich country, they pay the workers more. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Correct? Skilled workers get paid more in high-income countries than in low-income countries. I have a question for you. What is happening in UAE, in Oman, in Singapore,
In London,
in Qatar?
I'm afraid of plumbers. Very expensive.
Very expensive, yes. I'll tell you another story. In Melbourne, the plumbers make more than the profs. So what are you doing at university? Okay? The plumbers make more than profs. So aren't you glad you are in Indonesia? Where plumbers do not make more money than profs. Has anyone... Is this recording going to be shared across the world? You guys are all going to be architects, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to work in Australia? What do you think? You don't want or you don't know? You don't know. In Australia, an architect with 10 years work experience make less money than a taxi driver. Just keep that in mind. It is demand and supply. Okay? So that's why I keep telling students, don't just study the profession, even in civil engineering. Don't just study the profession, you must understand how the market works. All these decisions are made by the market. The architect can say, I want steel for a building, but if the market says that steel structures are not economical, they will change. So in Australia, this happens very often. The architect can design anything, contractor comes in and changes the whole design. It's like, no, we can't build this, because the client will always look for a cheaper solution, unless it's an iconic building. Then it's a different story. Then the architect gets plenty of say and budget. You must have the money to listen to the architect. If you do not have enough cash to build your building, it will always be lowest cost. And that's why economics is important. Now, can you tell me why Qatar, Singapore, UAE, and Oman looks cheap? They are rich countries, but they pay their construction workers less. Come on. Foreign workers, yes, migrant workers. They take workers from somewhere else.
Indonesia.
From Indonesia, from Bangladesh, yes. Malaysia as well. We have lots of Indonesian construction workers in Malaysia. So, I will also show the impact of getting foreign workers working for a lower wage in a rich country, because it messes up the economics. Same graph on the left, different graph on the right. It's now concrete. 1 cubic meter of concrete, 30 megapascal. You know about megapascals, right? Good. My students don't.
We use capex.
Yeah.
Kilopascal.
Kilo.
No, concrete is...
We always use kilo.
So this will be 30,000 kilopascal. No.
Kita satuannya.
Apa namanya? 250
Kilogram per centimeter square.
Satuan yang
Kekuatan beton.
K berapa?
We use tape.
Do you guys know? Have you done a concrete test?
No.
No, because you're architects here.
They're painters.
Okay, look at that. Does it tell you anything? It's expensive in a rich country, and it's terribly expensive in a poor country. Very strange. Okay? Yes, there are lots of differences in the price of concrete, US dollars. The countries that have foreign labor tends to be slightly cheaper. So you will then realize that there's a lot of labor involved in the making of concrete. Not very useful, this graph. Structural steel. Maybe slightly more expensive in a rich country, slightly cheaper in middle-income countries. Do you realize that steel can be exported? So theoretically, it should be, and there's an economic principle that says things that are commodities and that can be exported easily would be selling for the same price throughout the world. Correct? An iPhone 10 is sold for approximately the same price all over the world. This is called the theory of one price. Steel should be the same price, but because of local distribution costs, it is slightly different, but it's slightly more expensive in a rich country, cheaper in a middle-income country. It is cheapest in countries that produce steel. So if you are trying to buy steel from China, it would be cheap. If you're buying steel in a country that does not produce steel, it will be expensive. Does that make sense? Am I still holding your attention in terms of economics? This is all very simple economics. Now, US dollars. We don't like to compare things in US dollars. It's very complex because you keep having to think. Today, your Indonesian rupiah is, what is it, 14,000 to $1 US. Maybe next year it will change. So comparisons in US dollar does not make sense. There is another way of comparing, which is PPP, purchasing power parity. Again, that may change over time. The Economist has this Big Mac index, which is similar, and it gives me some ideas about how we come up with this model. The Big Mac index shows that Indonesian rupiah back in July 2018 is undervalued by about 40%. So you can, what this says is that your money buys you 40% more hamburger compared to $1 US in America. All right, so your money is actually more valuable than what it really is. That's good. That's good. But it still doesn't solve all these problems, having rupiah and US dollar and all those things. So I have come up with a new measure. Don't worry about currency exchange. Don't compare rupiah with US dollar or Australian dollar. If I can find input all in local currency, rupiah, 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 rupiah for labor, rupiah for concrete, rupiah for steel, and if I can come up with an index that removes the effect of currency, we can then compare. So this is what I'm trying to do. I take 1 cubic meter of concrete, and then I find out how many hours of wages is equivalent to 1 cubic meter of concrete. So 1 cubic meter of concrete in Australia is the same value as 2.3 hours of workers' wages. All right? 1 cubic meter of concrete in Indonesia is 40 hours of wages. There's no currency now. So it becomes a lot easier to understand.
Part of it is nasi padang usually.
In India, it is 75.
Kari.
Okay? 1 metric ton of reinforcing bar is 13.6 hours in Australia, 453 over here, 527 over there. What does this tell us? What does this tell us? Concrete is very expensive in India. Concrete is very expensive in India. Concrete is very, very cheap in Australia. Okay, so I'll show you later how we use this information. Steel. So in a high-income country, materials are cheap. in a low-wage country, labor is cheap, materials are expensive. So that may help you think about how you design your buildings, because certain things will control how things work. So now I've changed my graphs the other way around. So Switzerland is still here. Was there a pointer that I saw? No, the pointer. Never mind. Switzerland is on the left, which is high income. So the black line shows you income. Switzerland on the left, Uganda on the right. No, don't worry about pointer. You can see. So if I look at concrete divided by labor, where was Australia? Australia is about, what was it previously? 2.3. Yes, so Australia is 2.3. Indonesia is 40, and then in lower middle income countries, it's a lot more expensive. What about those countries with migrant workers? Qatar. So now you can see that it is very clear that in those countries, their concrete is expensive. Qatar, UAE, Oman, Argentina, possibly data is wrong. The originator of the information is very upset with me because I keep calling him and saying your data is wrong. Because when they collect data, they don't process. But once you process, then you think something's not right. Something not right. But look at Indonesia. So your concrete is expensive. So what I'm trying to tell you is this. Labor is very expensive in high-income countries, whereas materials are expensive in lower-income countries. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when you design to save materials over here. We do not design to save materials in Australia. We waste materials. All right? So for example, in some buildings you have your slabs. Slab thicknesses changing. Why? Why do you change the thicknesses of your slab? Savings. You save materials, right? If it is not needed, you reduce the thickness of the slabs. What do you think we do in Australia? All same. We make it all the same because the labor cost to keep shifting up and down the formwork is too expensive. Column sizes. You tend to have the same column sizes. There are some buildings where the column size keep changing. What do you think we do in Australia? Same size all the way up to the top. Why? The formwork. We can use the same formwork from ground floor all the way to the top floor. What do we reduce? Steel reinforcements. But we keep the same shape. You can't do that. It's expensive for you. Alright, so that's some of the use of things like this. So countries with cheaper migrant labor distort the concrete labor ratio. When Australians look at how Singapore builds, even though Singapore is a wealthy country, high income country, we think that their construction technology is old-fashioned. They may be a wealthy country, but they don't use modern technology. They are only during the last 5 years are they talking about more modern technologies, right? You begin seeing newspaper reports of Singapore going cross-laminated timber, prefabrication in a very big way because they have always been dependent on foreign workers. If you have cheap foreign workers, you just build the conventional way. You don't have to change until the government says, hey, maybe we should reduce the number of workers, then you have to use technology. Middle East. You've seen all those fantastic pictures of buildings coming up in the Middle East. Technology-wise, not so great because they are still dependent on foreign workers. So Other examples, 1 ton of structural steel, not so expensive in Australia, but very expensive here. Do you have lots of buildings built using structural steel? No? Why not? Too expensive. Yeah, you see? So you realize all these things. It's too expensive here. We have structural steel buildings because we tend to use structural steel only for high-rise construction. So let's compare steel versus concrete. All right? So the earlier comparison was between material and labor. We can now compare steel versus concrete. So reinforcing steel. Sorry, this is reinforcement over concrete. So if you look at the blue graphs, structural steel versus concrete, the blue ones have different ratios over here. It's quite normal, about 10 to 20 across the richer nations. Then all of a sudden Malaysia has very high structural steel costs. Why? Imports. If a country does not produce steel and they have to import structural steel, cost goes up. China produces steel. Where's China? China, Beijing, 10. So their structural steel is only 10 times cost of concrete. So you will see more structural steel structures in China. All right. So this gives you a way to compare. Bricks. This is bricks to concrete. For once, Australia is more expensive. So Australia, 1,000 bricks is equivalent to about 4 cubic meters of concrete in Australia. It is only equivalent to 0.7 cubic meters of concrete in Indonesia. Do you use more bricks? See? So this very simple comparison explains why you use more bricks compared to other countries. Even though our houses, you've seen pictures of Australian houses, are they brick? Yes, we have brick houses, but the bricks do not carry any loads. It is called a brick veneer. It is pretend brick. The house is actually a timber house, and they put a brick wall there just to show off that I have a brick house. Everybody likes to live in a brick house, right? Over here, I think only the kampung houses are timber. Yeah, but for us, everyone lives in a timber house, but we pretend to put brick walls. So the brick is minimum brick. Everything else is timber and plasterboard, because our bricks are expensive. So if you want to build here, yes, Indonesia use lots of bricks and less concrete. Timber. This is 100 meters of structural timber. Timber to concrete. Look, your timber is expensive. Is that true? Why? You have lots of forests. You export timber. Can you see this? Very strange, right? Things that you have not thought about. All of a sudden, your timber is expensive, our timber is cheap. And that explains why we use timber for the main structure of a house and less brick. I have data for all. I'm only showing you 4 because I'm in Indonesia and you're in Indonesia. If you're interested, I can give you all the data and then you can process for other countries. Anyone not from Indonesia here? No, everyone Indonesian. Okay, good. Good. If I ask that same question in a month's time, back in Melbourne, what do you think the answer will be? 40% are international students. Out of the 40%, 70% is from China. So I'm not sure what's going to happen now. Are they allowed to go back to class? Everyone will be. Strange, right? Okay, so this is brick to concrete for all the countries and timber to concrete for all the countries. So this will help you understand what's built in what country. So you look at Vietnam. Vietnam has super high timber costs. Indonesia is very high timber costs. So you should not build using timber. Australia has low timber costs. It helps you explain. So this graph helps you explain what happens across the world. Net exporters of steel will exhibit lower steel costs. Countries in the Middle East where bricks are imported, costs can be very high. Bricks are cheap in middle and lower income countries because it's locally produced. Correct? Your bricks are locally produced? Good. Sustainable?
Not really. Not really.
Why? Because you got to burn the bricks. No, if you find sustainable sources of energy, then it's fine. Because bricks, I think, is still one of the more sustainable products. Concrete is bad because the production of cement gives out a lot of carbon. Right? So bricks, not too bad. Timber is best. But you've cut down all your forests. You've got to think about, the next thing I need to do is carbon. To do a carbon ratio. Let's see how it works. Where natural supply of native timber is abundant, then timber cost becomes very low. So we have timber plantations in Australia to produce the timber, and I think over the next 6 months we will have lots of timber to process because the forests have all burned, and now they have to process those burnt timber very, very quickly before it rots. Right? Okay, I'm trying to, now that you've seen the usefulness of the ratio, I'm trying to detect if there is a particular ratio where the technology changes. Alright? So I'm looking at the first row is structural steel to concrete, and the last 3 rows, percentage A and E, should be percentage steel. Where's my cursor? This one, A and E, are for steel structures. So USA, at a ratio of 17.1, has 20% steel structures. UK, at a steel ratio of 14.8, has 45% steel structures. South Korea, 70% steel structures. China, they produce steel, their ratio is low, they have 50% steel structures. So is there a magic number where you change to using steel? What do you think? At what number does it change? There's no real number, right? I think at about, what is it? 12, 14? When the ratio is about 12, it makes, less than 12, it makes sense to use more steel. It's not perfect, all right? But it helps you think about where the ratios are and what material to use. Of course, the role of the architect is very important, that you have to think about your design to make it economical. All right, that's done. Let me explain how cost is different in Australia relative to all the other countries. So this is reinforced concrete slab. So I've worked out, not me, the cost consultant have worked it out, I only compile. Concrete slab, 200 mm thick, you need 200 mm concrete, right? You need to put in reinforcing bars. And in conventional construction, you need to provide formwork. So this is the breakdown in Australia. The dark blue is formwork. That bit, dark blue is formwork. Green is reinforcement. Light blue is concrete. what do you notice? Formwork is half. Formwork is half of our concrete slab cost. What is it in Indonesia? Formwork is nearly free. What is the most expensive? So your material cost is about 80%. Your formwork cost is 20%. Our material cost is 50%. Our formwork cost is 50%. So our total per square meter of 200 mm concrete slab comes to about $240 per square meter, and yours is $60 per square meter. Exactly the same. All right. So how do we make use of this information? Formwork cost is very high because it is labor intensive. We can't automate that. We haven't invented a robot to pour concrete. Well, there are 3D printers that will pour concrete, but not at this level yet. So formwork costs, you have to have workers to cut the plywood, put it up, support, make it watertight, clean, prevent the concrete from sticking to the molds. After pouring concrete, you got to pull it down, take it up to the next level. It's all very labor intensive. And that's why it's expensive in Australia. So what I'm trying to say is that in Australia, we will think of ways to not use formwork. It is half the cost of my slab. And it's not used in the building. It's waste. It's a temporary cost that is not incorporated into the building. What a waste, right? Whereas in Indonesia, it's only 20%. Yeah, fine. You got to pay for that. So this is a picture from a developing country. You use lots of formwork to support your concrete structure. This is a picture from Australia. We don't use formwork or timber formwork anymore. So what? Like I said, I only show one picture. 2 pictures so far. So what do you see here? We precast our columns. Our columns are not only a single story column. These columns are double story columns. One precast, one section. We precast everything. Even the walls, the lift core on the right hand side are all precast. So this is, I think, a picture taken of our architecture building. You've seen our architecture building? Pictures you must have had. Some of my colleagues coming over talking about architecture building. No? Not yet. Okay, I'll show you videos later on if we have time. What do we do for formwork? What is the blue and the black stuff? Bondec, steel formwork. Yeah. So you use Bondec here as well? Yeah. So we use Bondec because Bondec is significantly cheaper than formwork. We don't mind leaving it there because it's cheaper than formwork. All right. Next question. While I was waiting for you. Oh yeah, by the way, you can stop me anytime and ask questions. But because you didn't stop, I asked you the question, why is it blue? Why is the formwork blue? Or the Bondec blue? Why is the Bondec blue? Some of them blue, some of them black. It is not rust. Rust is red. See, you forgot to ask questions. The challenge is to ask me before I ask you. Why is it blue?
Plastic?
No. Oh, come on. You guys are all going to work in the industry. You cannot put plastic as reinforcement or formwork. Then it won't bond. Why is it blue? It's coated. It's painted blue. Yes. It's painted blue. Why do they choose blue? You ask the ladies, they'll make it pink. Must be a guy, right? Must be an engineer making this choice, because the architects will come up 3 colors. We are always very worried about asking engineers, asking the architects to design industrial buildings. We like our industrial buildings rectangular and boring, 1 color. You come to Melbourne, you will find that there are some industrial buildings where the client accidentally tells the architect to design the building. Comes out 3 colors, rainbow color on one side. We're like, come on, why is it blue? Nothing to do with the architect.
Is it because if it's black, it absorbs more heat from the sun?
It's close, very close. This is formwork. They haven't poured the concrete on yet. Close. Think along those lines. Sun is shining. What is the original color? Silver. So, reflection. The workers say that the sunlight on a silver formwork reflect light into their eyes. And because the workers are the bosses, they make more money than professors, remember? They say you have to paint this. Very simple answer. Because of the worker. The worker says glare. So they all wear Ray-Ban sunglasses. That's why some black, some blue. Okay? Nothing, not the technical issue. So you can see that we tend to use a lot of Bondac because Bondac as a material is cheaper than formwork. We precast as much as possible. Columns are all the same size. Right? The walls, we make it extra thick, we make it uniform thicknesses just to make it easy to construct. Because our concrete is cheap. Not in actual dollar terms. In dollar terms it's expensive, but relatively cheap. You can't do that. So does that help you understand why you do not use Bondac but you use regular formwork? Because for you, formwork is cheap. Bondac is expensive. So don't try to do funny things. Understand this first before you decide on what technology to use. Can you now understand how I'm tackling construction industry development in Indonesia? Many engineers, because they are trained overseas, always think the best technology. Let's get a 3D printer to print low-cost housing for everyone. Does that work for you? No. No. So don't just import technology because you go overseas and get a high-tech degree. Come back here, economics doesn't work. You got to think what works. Cranes, cranes. You can also look at cranes. Very expensive, you know why? Where is Indonesia? See, your crane is equivalent to 450 hours of labor. A crane in Australia is 10 hours of labor. So of course we use cranes. Does that make sense? So can you think about precasting? So if I go back to the previous slide, how many cranes do we need over here? Lots of cranes. Because everything needs to be picked up. You would have done it with fewer cranes. Because cranes are expensive. Does that make sense, right? Then you look at those countries with foreign workers. See? They are wealthy countries, but cranes are expensive for them. Hey, I should finish my lecture early for food. Nasi Padang, you see? See, I'm an economist. Always motivated by reward. Any questions? Any questions so far? So this is very different from what you normally study, right? So technology is expensive in a lower income country. So the next challenge is this. Should you invest in labor intensive construction? You have to decide where. It's a very difficult question. You know that it's more economical to build using labor intensive construction, but do you still do labor intensive construction, or do you try to move it forward? And that's something only Indonesians can think about. As an outsider, I think I can give you the information, I can give you the analysis, but you think about how you want to take it forward. All right? Because if you constantly use this and only use labor-intensive construction, you will not improve. You will still have to improve. So I will show you how these ratios change the use of technology over time. All right? So in Melbourne, I can get data on cost since 1972. Some of you are not born yet. Most of you are not born yet. All of you are not born yet. Okay? So we have data from a long, long time ago. So what I want to do is compare 4 structural systems, and I'm sure you're familiar with them. Number 1 is the conventional reinforced concrete beam and slab, which is how you build here. Number 2, reinforced concrete slab with metal formwork. All right, that's not bond deck, that's con deck. Number 3, post-tension slab with metal formwork. Have you learned post-tensioning? Post-tension concrete? Good. What is the advantage of post-tension concrete? Shallower. What else? No deflection. All right, that's very important, no deflection. So it's a very thin slab. Number 4, precast concrete. So fully precast. Now, as architects, you guys will say, no, precast looks horrible. And also very hard to operate here in an earthquake zone. We don't have earthquakes, so we tend to use lots of precast. Graph is a bit small, but I will send Pak Irwan a copy of this later on so he can distribute it to you. If I look at 1972 until 2015,